There are wounds you cannot see, yet they leave you hollow inside like a house in ruins where you still turn on the lights, hoping someone will come back. And few things are more humiliating than this. Still calling home the place where you were betrayed. Still reaching out to those who let go of you without even trembling. The most destructive thing is not always the betrayal itself. It is what you do afterward. Going back to look for love in the same place, making excuses, enduring it, lowering yourself. That is where the fall begins. When you confuse loyalty with putting up with everything, and call it love when in truth it is just the habit of swallowing your dignity. Today you are going to understand why sometimes loneliness hurts less than begging for a place in your own family. I am Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. Stay with me because we are going to walk through 7 truths, and the last one may be the one that finally makes you stop betraying yourself. Let us begin. Some people were not destroyed the day their family betrayed them. They were destroyed afterward when they kept insisting, justifying, waiting for a different look, a different call, some small gesture that would let them keep believing everything could still be saved. And that second wound is often worse than the first, because it no longer comes only from what was done to you, but from what you agreed to keep tolerating just so you would not feel cast out. This is where the first truth of this journey begins. The deepest wound is not the betrayal, but still begging for love after seeing it. Family betrayal carries a particular kind of cruelty because it strikes the most primitive part of the human being. You are not talking about a stranger who disappointed you. You are talking about people your mind linked to shelter, belonging, identity. That is why it is so hard to accept what is obvious. Because when the wound comes from outside, you protect yourself. But when it comes from within the circle that was supposed to care for you, you often do something sadder. You start shrinking the truth so you do not lose the bond. You tell yourself it was not that bad, that maybe they were going through something, that deep down they do love you, that they just did not know how to do better. And so, little by little, you turn clarity into a form of betrayal against yourself. The most humiliating thing is not always that they failed you. The most humiliating thing is catching yourself going back to the same place again and again, heart in hand, waiting for crumbs of recognition as if they were a feast. How many times can a person explain away someone else's contempt before admitting they are not being loved but managed? How many times can habit be mistaken for affection before it leaves you empty inside? The answer hurts, because no one wants to see themselves in that mirror. But that is the exact point where recovery begins, when you stop dressing up humiliation in noble words. Epictetus, who knew the harshness of life through slavery before teaching inner freedom, left behind an idea that strikes with precision here. It is not events that disturb people, but the judgments they form about those events. And that means something uncomfortable. The betrayal was real, yes. The pain was real, yes. But the prolonged torment began when you started interpreting your pursuit of those who hurt you as proof of love, patience, or nobility, as if dragging yourself made you more worthy, as if enduring everything made you a better son, a better sister, a better human being. What a twisted arrangement. They wound you, and on top of that you feel guilty for beginning to grow tired. Begging for love after seeing the truth wears you down in a silent way. It does not break you all at once. It erodes you. It gets you used to asking permission to exist, to measuring your words so you do not make anyone uncomfortable, to accepting disdain just to keep a seat at a table where they never stopped reminding you that you were replaceable. And when someone lives too long under that logic, they begin to lose their sense of their own worth. They no longer choose from dignity but from fear of being left alone. They no longer ask whether that bond is good for them, but how much more pain they can bear without being abandoned completely. That is where the wound becomes moral, not merely emotional. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and on this subject that line feels tailor-made. Because many people remain trapped not only by what their family did to them, but by the fantasy of what might one day happen if they keep trying hard enough. They keep waiting for a repair that never comes, an apology that never comes, a loving version of people who have already shown their emotional smallness through their actions. And while they wait for that domestic miracle, life passes, peace is delayed, and dignity is bargained away. All because they cannot accept that sometimes the true act of self-love begins when you stop calling hope what is really dependence. The first break you need is not with them, but with the illusion that keeps you on your knees. Because as long as you keep believing that enduring humiliation is a form of love, you will keep handing your center over to people who never protected it. And when that truth is truly understood, something begins to change. You no longer see the betrayal as a painful accident, but as a revelation. You no longer ask how to win back their affection, but why you were willing to lose yourself to keep it. And that question, even though it burns, opens the door to the next step. One of the most dangerous lies taught from an early age is that family, simply by being family, deserves unlimited loyalty. As if blood ties made any treatment sacred. As if sharing a last name made holy what in any other context you would call manipulation, contempt, or emotional abuse. And so, without realizing it, you end up trapped in a logic where love stops being a refuge and becomes a mechanism of obedience. We have arrived at the second point of this video, and it is understanding that family can also turn love into a form of submission. They do not always do it with shouting or obvious violence. Sometimes they do it with something subtler, more socially accepted, and therefore harder to detect. They do it through guilt, through calculated silences, through that theatrical ability to make you feel cruel for setting even the smallest boundary. They remind you of everything they have done for you. They repeat that family is all you have. They look at you as though your need for respect were an unforgivable betrayal. And suddenly defending yourself seems like a moral failure, while putting up with everything is disguised as nobility. It is an elegant trap. They teach you to call your own surrender love. The problem is that many people never allow themselves to ask the decisive question. If this same treatment came from someone outside your family, would you still justify it so devotedly? If a stranger humiliated you, invalidated you, or made you feel small every time you tried to be yourself, no one would tell you to endure it out of love. But when it comes from family, the ritual of endurance appears. You have to understand them. You have to be patient. You have to give in. You have to go back. You always have to go back. A curious idea of love, one that demands that you be the one who breaks, so others do not have to feel uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius, who carried the weight of power without ceasing to examine his inner life, wrote that if someone despises you, examine whether what they say is true. If it is, correct yourself, and if it is not, let their words return to them. That idea is crucial here, because a family that keeps you under submission usually survives on your absorbing, without filter, everything they project onto you. They call you ungrateful when you stop obeying. They call you cold when you stop begging. They call you arrogant when you finally stop lowering your head. But the fact that they label your awakening that way does not mean they are right. Sometimes the conflict is not born because you changed for the worse, but because you are no longer so easy to manipulate. Emotional submission within a family works because it settles into everyday gestures, not just major episodes. It is in the joke that puts you down and then demands that you have a sense of humor. It is in the advice that is really meant to control you. It is in the help they later charge you for as an endless debt. It is in that habit of reminding you who is in charge, who decides, who has the right to define what you feel and what you are worth. And if you spend too many years inside that dynamic, you start asking permission even to think differently. You become an expert at anticipating other people's reactions, but illiterate when it comes to listening to your own truth. The irony is that those who invoke the word family the most are sometimes the very ones who understand least what it should mean. Because family should not be the place where you learn to silence yourself just to survive. It should not be the structure that rewards your submission and punishes your dignity. It should not be that emotional courtroom where you always end up guilty for feeling hurt. And yet many people grew up inside that script and still defend it as if it were normal. Of course they do, because admitting the truth would be too uncomfortable. It would mean recognizing that what they called love for years had a lot to do with control and very little to do with care. Cato the Younger, a symbol of integrity that did not kneel before corruption, left behind through his life a brutal lesson. It is better to stand firm alone than to join the crowd in injustice. Applied to this ground, it means something simple and devastating. It is better to be seen as difficult, distant, or ungrateful by a family that demands servitude than to keep playing the obedient role of someone who lets themselves be degraded in order to fit in. Because when love is used to control you, refusing to obey is not cruelty, it is mental health. Understanding this completely changes the inner map. You no longer see certain gestures as signs of affection, but as devices of control. You no longer interpret your discomfort as an exaggeration, but as a sign that something inside you has begun to wake up. And that prepares the ground for the next truth, one many people are afraid to accept because it breaks the final spell. Sometimes being alone hurts less than continuing to live, where your presence depends on how much you are willing to lower yourself. There is a particularly bitter stage in this process, and it comes when you begin to suspect that being alone may not be the worst thing that can happen to you. Because for years, you were taught the opposite. You were made to believe that any company, even the kind that hurts you, was better than emptiness. That having no family close by was a tragedy, even if that closeness cost you your peace, your breath, and your dignity. But there comes a moment when awareness matures and stops fearing loneliness as much as repeated humiliation. We have reached the third point of this video, and it is understanding that loneliness hurts less than living where you have to beg for a place. Loneliness has a bad reputation because at first it confronts you with yourself without anesthesia. It does not distract you, flatter you, or entertain you with emotional crumbs. It sits you down in front of your own emptiness and forces you to look at it. And of course, that is frightening. More frightening than continuing to endure a hostile environment, because in that environment, at least you already know the script. You already know who invalidates you, who manipulates you, who disappears, who shows up only when it suits them. It is a familiar hell, and that is why so many people prefer it. Human beings can tolerate a family wound longer than a clean uncertainty. What a strange habit. Calling safe the very thing that shrinks your soul. But think about this honestly. What wears you down more? Going through a season of silence so you can rebuild yourself, or spending entire years begging for a seat at a table where your presence will always be conditional? What breaks you more? Sleeping alone, or living surrounded by people who make you feel like an outsider in your own blood? The answer usually appears when you stop romanticizing belonging, because not all company truly accompanies you. Not all closeness supports you. Sometimes being surrounded is the most sophisticated form of abandonment. Seneca, who understood the value of inner self-sufficiency, wrote that the wise person is content with himself not because he despises others, but because he has learned not to depend on them for his stability. And that idea carries immense weight here. Loneliness does not become less painful on its own. It becomes bearable when you stop seeing it as punishment and begin to see it as a space for detox. You are no longer alone because nobody loved you. You are alone because you chose to stop lowering yourself. It is no longer an imposed exile. It is a necessary retreat so that your mind and your character can stop living at the mercy of an environment that was warping them. Besides, loneliness has an honesty that certain relationships do not. It does not promise affection only to charge you obedience later. It does not embrace you just to use your vulnerability against you. It does not invite you to stay, and then remind you that you were never really wanted. Loneliness, hard as it may be, does not humiliate you. It does not play with your expectations. It does not demand that you smile while you are falling apart. And that changes everything because clean pain can be endured. Daily degradation, on the other hand, ends up reshaping your identity. You begin to accept the unacceptable, normalize what is toxic, and call yourself too sensitive simply because you can no longer keep swallowing poison politely. Musonius Rufus taught that character is not formed in comfort, but in the deliberate practice of what we would rather avoid. And few practices are as harsh and as fruitful as learning to stand on your own without the family you once believed was indispensable. That is where you discover things you could not see while you were still begging for affection. You discover how much fear was ruling you. You discover how much energy you were wasting trying to be accepted by people who never intended to treat you fairly. You discover that much of your suffering did not come from being alone, but from continuing to insist where you were always being diminished. If this video has brought you face to face with truths you may have spent years avoiding, subscribe and leave a like, because what comes next does not stay in the pain. It will show you how to recover the center others made you bargain away. And in the comments, write the phrase "better alone than in bad company," along with the country you are listening from. There are still crucial parts left to go through, and the last one may change forever the way you understand who deserves to be called family. There are abandonments that hurt like a sharp blow, but sustained humiliation works differently. It does not fall on you all at once. It breaks you little by little, through small renunciations, minor concessions, forced smiles, and silences you swallow so you do not make anyone uncomfortable. That is why many people do not realize how much damage they have taken until one day they no longer recognize their own voice. What is serious is not only that others have pushed you aside. What is serious is what happens inside you when you begin to deform yourself just to keep being accepted. And that brings us to the fourth lesson of this journey. Humiliating yourself to be accepted breaks you more than any abandonment. Because abandonment, hard as it may be, at least preserves a simple truth. Someone left or someone was not there. But humiliation in exchange for acceptance creates a more intimate fracture. It forces you to participate in your own degradation, to cooperate with the mechanism that reduces you, to say nothing is wrong when something clearly is, to tolerate jokes that make you smaller, contempt that wounds you, injustices that would shake you deeply if they came from anyone else. And so, every time you betray yourself so you do not lose a bond, you leave a mark. Not always visible, not always immediate, but deep. A mark that teaches your mind that keeping company matters more than keeping yourself. The problem is that this form of breaking usually comes disguised as adaptation. They tell you to grow up, not to exaggerate, to learn to give in, that this is just how family is. And you, just so you will not be seen as the difficult one, begin cutting away essential parts of your character. You speak less, feel less, protest less. You become functional for the environment, but more and more foreign to yourself. And what is the point of being accepted on the outside, if on the inside you have already become someone who lives asking permission to exist? That is where the real devastation appears, when apparent peace with others costs you a silent war with yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that you should do everything free from hypocrisy. It sounds like a simple phrase, but here it becomes a diagnosis. Because humiliating yourself to be accepted is a form of forced hypocrisy. You pretend something does not hurt, pretend something does not offend you, pretend you are fine with rules that degrade you. And the soul pays for that performance. It pays with anxiety, resentment, moral exhaustion, with that feeling of living a life that never fully feels like your own. No one comes out untouched after years of acting submissive just to keep approval. There is a cruel irony in all this. The more you lower yourself so they will accept you, the less they respect you. Not because the world is fair, but because constant surrender sends a silent message. You can keep tightening the pressure, I will still be here. And many family environments do exactly that. They test how far they can stretch you, how far they can use you, how far they can invalidate you without your leaving. When they discover that you tolerate too much, they usually do not correct themselves. They get used to it. That is why it is not enough to suffer in silence, hoping that one day they will value your endurance. It almost never happens. Endurance, when badly managed, does not inspire love, it trains abuse. Cato the Younger left behind a teaching that cuts through this point with brutal clarity. Integrity does not allow partial concessions, because yielding in small things prepares the fall in what matters most. That means that every time you accept a small humiliation to preserve your place, you are training your spirit to endure a greater one the next time. Every small surrender becomes a precedent. Every swallowed silence becomes permission. And one day, you discover that the price of continuing to belong has been too high. Your spontaneity, your clarity, your dignity, even your ability to trust your own perceptions. That is why this part of the path requires an uncomfortable but clean decision. Stop measuring your worth by the level of acceptance you can win in an environment that forces you to lower yourself. Stop interpreting conditional admission as love. Stop thinking that being tolerated is the same as being loved, because once you see this clearly, you can no longer keep collaborating in your own emotional mutilation. And when that collaboration ends, something harsher but also truer begins. The encounter with who you are when you finally stop negotiating your soul just so you will not feel excluded. After a certain point, loneliness stops feeling like a sentence and begins to feel more like an empty room where, at last, you no longer have to perform. No one demands that you be pleasing. No one asks you to minimize what you felt. No one rewards you for smiling while you are breaking apart. And although that silence is frightening at first, because it strips away all the distractions you once used to avoid facing yourself, it also has a severe virtue. It forces you to find yourself without disguises. We have reached the fifth principle of this video, and it is understanding that being alone does not destroy you. It forces you to find yourself without disguises. Many people fear loneliness not because of the emptiness itself, but because of what that emptiness reveals. While you were living, trying to be accepted by a family that hurt you, you had a role to play. The mediator, the strong one, the one who endures, the one who always comes back, the one who understands everyone even though no one understands him. But when you step away, those characters begin to fall. And then a question appears that no longer allows escape. Without that constant effort to be accepted, who are you really? It is not a comfortable question. In fact, it usually arrives accompanied by confusion, anger, even a strange grief for the identity you built while surviving. That is where many people want to turn back, because it is one thing to suffer because of others, and something far more uncomfortable to discover how much of your life was organized around that need to be loved by them. You realize that you chose words, decisions, even versions of yourself based on not losing approval. And when you see that, the first reaction is usually harsh. Shame, resistance, that bitter feeling of having lived too long away from your own center. But do not confuse that discomfort with destruction. In reality, it is a sign that what was false is finally falling away. Viktor Frankl, who lived through circumstances where almost everything could be taken away except inner dignity, wrote that everything can be taken from a person except the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Here, that idea does not sound philosophical, it sounds urgent, because being alone gives you back precisely that space of choice you had once surrendered. You no longer react according to your family's emotional climate. You no longer live on edge, wondering whether today they will include you, tolerate you, or punish you with distance. You begin to recover something more valuable than company, judgment. And when judgment returns, it puts in order what attachment had confused. Clean memory also returns. You begin to remember episodes you once justified and now see with uncomfortable clarity. Words that were not jokes, gestures that were not care, favors that were control disguised as generosity. And along with that clarity comes another, even more important recovery: your own instinct. For a long time, perhaps you doubted yourself, your perceptions, your right to feel wounded. Loneliness, when lived through well, corrects that. It teaches you to trust your reading of what happened, to stop asking permission to name what hurt you, to understand that you were not exaggerating. You were waking up. Ryan Holiday, reinterpreting Stoicism in practical terms, insists that the obstacle does not block the path, but becomes the path when we choose to face it clearly. And that is exactly what happens here. Loneliness is not the reward, but it can be the ground where you rebuild yourself in truth. Not to become cold or unreachable, but to become less easy to manipulate, less willing to sell yourself for emotional scraps, less confused between love and dependence. Loneliness takes away your masks, yes, but in doing so it also gives you back your structure. And when you begin to find yourself without disguises, even the way you understand pain changes. You no longer see it only as an injustice done to you, but as a stage that forced you to see with brutal honesty which parts of yourself needed strengthening. That is the fruitful part of this process, perhaps the hardest but also the most fertile. Because once you stop performing in order to be loved, a possibility appears that did not exist before, to live from the truth even if not everyone approves of it. And that prepares the next step, the most liberating of all, to stop waiting for repair from those who already proved they do not know how to love without hurting. There is one chain that is especially hard to break, and it is not always contact with the people who harmed you. Sometimes the strongest chain is the hope that one day they will understand everything, recognize the damage, change the way they treat you, and give back something of what they took from you. Many people spend entire years tied to that hope. They are not only waiting for an apology, they are waiting for a moral restoration of the past. And although that hope may seem noble, it is often the last thing keeping them captive. Here, we enter the sixth truth of this video. Freedom begins when you stop expecting repair from those who betrayed you. Because as long as you keep waiting for them to fix what they broke, your peace remains in their hands. Your rest depends on someone else's gesture. Your closure depends on a conscience that may never wake up. Your ability to move forward depends on the people who hurt you suddenly becoming the kind of people they have never shown themselves to be. and that is a refined form of emotional slavery. It does not matter that you no longer call them, no longer explain yourself, or have even physically walked away. If inside you are still waiting for the great scene of recognition, you are still bound. Only now the chains are invisible and for that very reason harder to cut. Epictetus taught that whoever desires only what depends on their own will never be forced to act against their own reason. Applied to this wound, the message is direct. It does not depend on you whether they understand. It does not depend on you whether they repent. It does not depend on you whether one day they learn to love with the tenderness they never had. What does depend on you is stopping the habit of mortgaging your balance to that possibility. And here, one of the most adult decisions a person can make appears: to accept that some repairs will never come, and that even so your life can regain order, meaning, and dignity. This does not mean denying the pain or pretending it does not matter, much less does it mean absolving those who caused harm. It means something more demanding, letting go of the fantasy that your healing needs their participation. Is it hard? Very. Because a part of you still wants them to see what they did, still wants someone to name your wound with justice, still wants the symbolic act that would reorder the past. But life rarely follows such a neat script, and continuing to demand it from the world only prolongs the exhaustion. Sometimes emotional maturity consists in accepting that closure will not come in the form of an apology, but in the form of a decision. Seneca warned that it is not that we have little time, but that we lose much of what has been given to us. And few losses of time are as devastating as waiting for someone to give back what they never knew how to care for. Years imagining conversations that never happen. Years rewriting scenes so that at last they might understand you. Years putting your own life on hold for a repair that may never come. And how much more are you going to give to that waiting? How much of your present are you still going to sacrifice, trying to collect an emotional debt from people who live as though they owed nothing? That is the question that opens the door to real freedom. When you stop expecting repair, something very sober settles inside you. You are no longer oriented backward. You no longer need the past to change shape in order to allow yourself to live. You no longer beg for emotional justice from people who never had the courage to look at themselves. And then a quiet transformation happens. You recover energy. Energy to build different relationships. Energy to choose better. Energy to stop revolving around the wound as if it were the center of your identity. The betrayal remains part of your story, but it stops being the altar where you sacrifice your future. It is not resignation. It is sovereignty. It is refusing to place your peace in the hands of people who have already shown they do not know how to hold it. It is understanding that freedom does not begin when they change, but when you stop living suspended in the hope of that change. And when that truth becomes flesh, the whole map reorganizes itself. Because it is no longer only about walking away from the harm, but about understanding something higher and cleaner. True family does not begin where you share blood, but where your dignity does not have to be negotiated in order to be welcomed. After everything in this journey, it is no longer only about understanding the damage or justifying the distance. It is about embracing a higher truth, one of those truths that hurts at first because it breaks years of emotional programming. Not every family deserves to keep occupying the center of your life just because they share your blood. There are bonds that tie you down, blame you, use you, and then call you ungrateful when you finally try to breathe far away from them. And at that point, loneliness stops being a threat and becomes a moral boundary. We have reached the seventh and final step of this video: better alone than humiliated, because true family begins where your dignity is not up for negotiation. For a long time, perhaps you thought that losing your family meant losing everything, that walking away would make you cold, hard, almost monstrous. But that idea usually comes from the very environments that benefited from your endurance. Because anyone who lives off your submission will always present your dignity as selfishness. Anyone who was comfortable with your silence will always call your truth rebellion. And yet, there comes a moment in life when you must stop asking how they see you and begin asking something far more serious. What price am I paying to keep calling this love? True family is not the one that tolerates you as long as you make yourself smaller. It is not the one that opens the door to you if you arrive obedient, quiet, and ready once again to swallow your pain. It is not the one that turns your need for respect into a personal offense. Family, in the most human and dignified sense, is the place where you can exist without selling essential parts of yourself just to preserve the bond, where you do not have to translate your wound to make it seem acceptable, where your boundary is not an aggression, and your truth does not need a disguise to be heard. Everything else may be habit, kinship, shared history, but it does not deserve to be called refuge. Ralph Waldo Emerson, deeply influenced by the moral self-reliance of Stoicism, wrote that nothing can bring peace to a person except themselves when they choose to remain faithful to their own inner law. And that faithfulness changes everything here, because there comes a point when your task is no longer to convince anyone that they loved you badly. Your task is to stop betraying your conscience just to keep a place where you were always required to make yourself smaller. Does it hurt to let go of certain family fantasies? Of course it does. It hurts to accept that you may never have with them the warmth, the fairness, or the tenderness you hoped for. But it hurts more to stay kneeling at a door that only opens when you enter without dignity. Besides, life has a sober irony. When you finally stop begging for affection, you begin to recognize more clearly where there is reciprocity, where there is care, where there is clean presence. People who do not share your blood, but do share your truth. Relationships that do not need to humiliate you in order to feel secure. Spaces where you do not have to apologize for existing exactly as you are. That is where you understand something decisive. Family can also be chosen, built, earned. And not from whim, but from a more mature standard. The standard of someone who has already learned that belonging without dignity is not belonging. It is emotional servitude with good publicity. Cato the Younger, a fierce example of uprightness, left behind through his life a lesson that feels written to close this subject. Whoever negotiates their conscience for convenience loses the very thing they were trying to protect. That means that if keeping your family requires you to give up your truth, your peace, or your self-respect, then in reality, you were already losing what mattered most. Company bought with humiliation always costs too much, and although loneliness may seem harsh at first, it preserves at least one thing that no degrading bond can ever give you: the possibility of living without being ashamed of yourself. That is why this is not a naive glorification of loneliness. It is not about locking yourself inside pride or distrusting everyone. It is about understanding that sometimes being alone is a necessary season if you want to stop calling love something that forces you to crawl. A hard season, yes, but an honorable one. And from there, something much cleaner than the old obedience disguised as loyalty can begin. A life in which you no longer accept being half-loved. A life in which dignity stops being the price and becomes the foundation. That is the point where emotional begging ends and true freedom begins. If you have made it this far, it is because you are not one of those who look for easy comfort just to keep enduring the same thing. Most people would rather keep repeating that family is sacred even while they are falling apart inside, because facing certain truths takes more courage than simply continuing to put up with them. But you have already seen something that cannot be unseen. You already understand that not every blood tie deserves emotional obedience, and that some forms of loneliness are cleaner than many kinds of company. Now the decision is yours. Go back to justifying what humiliates you, or begin to see your dignity as the boundary that is no longer up for negotiation. And that decision cannot remain a passing emotion that fades when the video ends. It has to become a stance, a word, and an action. That is why I want you to declare it in the comments with a short phrase that marks your inner position: better alone than in bad company. And alongside it, write the country you are listening from. Do it like someone who stops hiding, like someone who no longer asks permission to acknowledge what they have lived through and to choose a more dignified way forward. Because listening to these ideas is not enough. What matters is what you decide to do with them when no one is watching. I am Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. This channel exists for something more than talking about philosophy or personal wounds. It exists to remind us, in the middle of a world that normalizes dependence, guilt, and humiliation, that it is still possible to live with truth, character, and conscience. We are not here to decorate pain with pretty phrases, but to look directly at what many people would rather cover up. And if you feel this message could shake someone who is still trapped in a loyalty that is destroying them, share it. Subscribe and become part of this community if you know this path does not end with a single video. Because recovering your dignity is not a moment. It is a way of life that must be trained, refined, and protected. And what is coming in the next videos may help you go even deeper into that work. Stay close, because when a person stops begging for love, where there was only humiliation, they are only beginning to discover the real strength they had inside all along.